foreign ministers are set to meet in Brussels on Tuesday, and Russian aggression will be top of the agenda. Tensions between Russia and Ukraine escalated when Russia seized 3 Ukrainian naval ships late last month. What should the West and NATO do to deter Vladimir Putin? Joining me now from New York is Sestanovich, a former State Department official and professor of international affairs at Columbia University. Stephen, what can NATO do at this point?
Well, NATO wants to make as clear as possible to the Russians that they made a mistake, that they should reverse gear, release the ships and the prisoners, and allow a more normal access for Ukrainian shipping into their own ports. They also want to make clear that they're firmly behind Ukraine in security terms and will continue to provide military equipment. And they also want to try to re-energize the diplomacy. This has been on hold for some time, and with a Ukrainian presidential election coming up, there may not really be the best environment for making progress on this. But the ministers will surely want to push to get some kind of new movement while making clear that that doesn't in any way compromise their support for Ukraine.
Canada has troops in the region, including in Ukraine and in Latvia, to try to deter Russia. One of the things the Ukrainians have been talking about is actually potentially having NATO ships come to the area where this is happening. Do you think that that's a realistic possibility?
I think NATO ministers and NATO governments are going to be very reluctant to do anything that creates a new risk of military confrontation. But they are thinking about, and various NATO governments have proposed, upgrading the military presence and exercises in the Black Sea. But this is a pretty dicey situation, and they don't want to make it worse. You know, people remember that in 2008, the Russians provoked the Georgians again and again, another neighboring state, and eventually the Georgians took the bait, and the result was a war. Nobody wants that to happen with Ukraine. So there's going to be a lot of caution conveyed to both sides, but including the Ukrainians. Let's not do anything stupid.
Do you think there's a threshold that risks a Ukrainian retaliation?
Look, there is an ongoing war in eastern Ukraine. There is firing every day. There are international observers who talk about violations of an ostensible ceasefire that are in the dozens every day. So there's always a possible trigger for new hostilities. If the Russians decide, though, as they've been doing for about 6 months, to completely choke off Ukrainian shipping, that will produce new tensions, and it will put new pressure on any Ukrainian government to respond. My guess is the Russians, as they normally do, having tested the waters, will back away a little bit from this so as not to have a rapid escalation. When they put more pressure on Ukraine, they want it to stick, and they just want the Ukrainians to back down.
There's been lots of discussion this weekend about the relationship between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. Does Donald Trump have any influence over Vladimir Putin in a situation like this?
Well, Trump's main influence is to convey very strong Western unity and to indicate what kinds of new problems could be created for Putin if he does something rash and continues to act in an aggressive way against Ukraine. New sanctions, new military equipment for Ukraine, new isolation for Russia. That's the main influence of a negative kind. He may also want to hold out the prospect of some kind of improvement in Russian-American relations, and that's been one incentive that the Trump administration has dangled before Putin. But the truth is they haven't been able to deliver on that. So most of the pressure on Putin is going to be of a negative kind. If you continue to put pressure on Ukraine, there's going to be a world of hurt ahead of you.
Is that kind of pressure effective? I wonder, because we've spent so much money and sent so many troops to try to deter the Russians, and yet now we see them seizing Ukrainian ships.
Yeah, it's a good question for policymakers and for journalists and for experts. The Russians have been under enough pressure until now not to escalate what they're doing against Ukraine. They haven't been under enough pressure to retreat. That's a difficulty in diplomacy, to be honest. I think that there were many people in Russia who wanted to go a lot further in 2014, and I believe that Western unity and sanctions actually helped slow them down and stop them, but it didn't force them to retreat.
Okay, Stephen, thank you so much for joining us with your time and expertise today.
Pleasure.